the exotic Copenhagen. Tim McCartney is equally exotic. Hagerstown, Maryland.
So, good afternoon. My name is Thesis McCartney, and so my thesis deals with revitalizing small city downtown, and as Herb just said, it's in Hagerstown. So the idea is that in order to revitalize these downtowns, they need to start re-evidencing or rebranding what originally worked in small city downtowns, the walkability. Since the car, that's all changed. A lot of that's been taken out of the small cities, so they need to get back to that. They need to get back to having multiple attractions in the downtown. And so, just to place Hagerstown in the state of Maryland, it is in Washington County. It's in western Maryland, and it's still considered part of the Baltimore, Washington, D.C. metropolitan area. And then in Washington County, Hagerstown is located to the northeast, and it's the seat of the county, so all the little cities form around it. So this is an aerial of what it currently looks like for the hospital, which has been removed. Okay, so the history of Hagerstown. It was formed in 1962 by Jonathan Hager. And then in 1810, its first census had its population at 2,342. And in 1814, when Washington County separated from Frederick County, and Hagerstown became the seat, they changed it to Hagerstown from Elizabeth. In 1861, it became a staging area for the Antietam, the Battle of Antietam in the Civil War. So there is a historical, there's a historical cemetery that sits right here that has a lot of Confederate soldiers buried in it. And then in 1867, this is when all the industry and what I think really started to form Hagerstown, or to affect the grid of the original city of Hagerstown, as the interstates used to actually make a complete loop around the city. So it's effectively named the hub city because of it. So there was a lot of railroad and industrial traffic within the city. So in 1960, 1980, of course, interstates came around. All that industry pushed toward the interstates because shipping was cheaper. So everything shifted outward, people moved to the suburbs, and the population started to decline. So the existing figure ground shows that we have this original strict grid, and then as the interstates, or as the railroad tracks hit it, you start to see how it started to affect the actual grid of the city over time, as they expanded outward. So this is history of the city. You start to see how the original grid showed. So this is the topography of the site. So Hagerstown sits in a valley. So the west side of Hagerstown is really high, and then it drops down into the valley, and then it goes back up on the eastern side of Hagerstown. And then throughout Hagerstown, there's a series of ridges, and most of the important streets run along those ridges. Most of the north-south streets run along those ridges. And so what I started to look at was how can Hagerstown start to attract or capture from its attractions that it has around it. And in Washington County, it has almost 2 million visitors a year that come to Washington County. And so how can I start to capture people that are going to the Antietam Battlefield? How can I start to capture people going to the casino now? And then also, Hagerstown has a ring that goes around it of a series of shopping. The American Medical Center, which is brand new, which they moved the hospital out of downtown to build. And then, of course, they have their own airport and a series of shops. And Antietam Battlefield is only located 11 miles outside of the center. So then I looked at the existing, right now Hagerstown is still pretty connected to the DC metropolitan area by the Interstate 70 and 81. And they still own, Maryland still owns existing right-of-way the old Western Maryland Railroad that is currently just sitting there, which it could be a huge opportunity. And so also, as we get closer to downtown, you start to see that Hagerstown has a huge cultural center here, which has the Roundhouse Museum, Museum of Modern Art, Museum of Art, and then several other little museums that are all formed within the city park. So they're all within this big green space. So, while looking at Hagerstown, I looked at the economic issues that face Hagerstown, and I realized that a lot of the people downtown are underemployed, they're in poverty, and that's affecting the downtown because shops can't sustain themselves, so they kind of just go into business. And so the idea is, how do we attract a diverse population, so multiple incomes to try to help revitalize the city. And so also, Hagerstown has what I would consider an issue with annexing land. So instead of building inward on themselves, they just constantly build outward. And so as you can see, from this being early in 1887, you can see that they just constantly got bigger. And by 1856, they were here. In 2014, they were there. So it's just constant. And then I think now it's even, this perimeter is actually bigger.
Why does that happen? Is it to increase the tax base?
I haven't figured that out. They just keep buying land outward.
That's usually why.
Your tax base.
Yes.
So their population doesn't decline because they constantly just buy more land out.
But the density does.
So yeah, the density declines because a lot of people are just out in the suburbs. And so some other issues I've found is that on the south side of Hagerstown, you see a huge grading of the urban fabric. So that you start to see the voids that are created, or that have been created by industry that is now dilapidated or falling down. And so that creates a huge opportunity. And also the east entrance to the city is a series of car dealerships and small little fast food restaurants. And so you go through this, and then all of a sudden you're in the historical downtown. You're like, well, how did I get here? There's no celebrated entrance to the city. And also, through observation, I noticed that the grid of the city is stronger going across the north side of the city, but it's obstructed going across the south. So the connection to the south part of South Hagerstown is very little, and so that's another opportunity to fix and bring more people downtown. And so,
One more question about the growth. What is, some of these new developments that are being placed, like the mall you mentioned in the hospital, what is existing there? Is it greenfield?
yeah, it's on.
It's agriculture.
Hagerstown's surrounded by a huge amount of farmland. And so, what I identified were majority of the issues that I see with Hagerstown were usually in the south part of Hagerstown, and they were in two different areas. One called the void, which is the space where old industrial buildings are just kind of underutilized and sitting there. And then the valley, which is the space where the topography drops off toward the creek, which is down here. And that is also filled with industrial buildings that are highly underutilized.
Are those your names or that's?
Yeah, they're names I made.
Okay.
And so, to start the strategy, I started looking at all different kinds of urban planning, from new urbanism, landscape urbanism, and then to some of these which are mainly for smaller cities. It's Attraction City, Connection City. And so, I looked at connection cities such as Savannah, Georgia, and how SCATS has started to revitalize that whole area of Savannah. And then Frederick, Maryland, in their canal project, which has led to hundreds of thousands of dollars of investment and connects various parts of Frederick. And then attraction cities such as eastern Pennsylvania, which found that because they had the Crayola, this is where Crayola started, they could build off of that. And so the Crayola experience is directly downtown and attracts 450,000 people a year. And then investment cities, which were cities that either the city invested in building jobs within the city, or the city allowed some investors to invest in something and then allowed them to grow the city. If they want that. So in Stamford, Connecticut, it's more about them investing in the workforce. So it's just a huge place for jobs. But then in Middleton, Connecticut, they allowed investors to redo dead mall, like a dead mall or plaza area in the middle, and it started a huge revitalization in Middleton. And so this is my overall plan, and I'll go into how I went about doing it. And so the idea is to create a huge necklace of green spaces called the Hub, which of course goes back to the history. And then from there, I'll explain how it did. And so first I looked at the existing, and then I looked at how many buildings I could actually remove, and how much space that I could actually make within the downtown Hagerstown. You can see that I removed a good portion of the old industrial buildings that filled up this site, but kept the residential fabric still intact. And then I looked at New Urbanist influence about how do I start to stitch these grids and these fragmented pieces of Hagerstown across these spaces that I have now created. So the idea is to create more connection to the south so that more people can come back and more pedestrians or vehicular movement can come back into Hagerstown to start creating some revitalization in the downtown. And then another one is looking at the Olmsted approach, creating a series of parks, a greenway that connects a series of parks. And because these parks hold a lot of the amenities of Hagerstown, they start to inform this edge as well as revitalize. So the idea is this is the original park system in Hagerstown. It's kind of fragmented. So this is the city park. And then they have some little pocket parks that go along it. And there's a canal that runs parallel to it. And then it dumps into the river by the creek that's down here. So the idea is, to create a series of parks that start to link those parks together. And then the next idea was to grab those parks and pull them into downtown, as well as grab existing things like the baseball stadium, which is located over here. That is currently up in the air whether they're going to stay in Hagerstown or not. So the idea was to pull that closer to the downtown, pull the MARC train into downtown, so that then Hagerstown becomes better connected to Washington, D.C. and Baltimore. And then that allows that more amenities to be closer to the downtown. And so this is the idea of pulling those green spaces up toward the center. And then the idea of using that existing right-of-way that Maryland owns, and allowing that this existing right-of-way connects to the MARC that runs to the south of Washington County, and pulling that up into a historical railroad station that is already exists in Hagerstown.
Tim, where is that on the big map? Just point out where the station is on the big
Station
map.
is right here. So
And
this
Main
is-
Street is,
Main Street is this one.
Where's the train tracks over here? Is it the white?
The train tracks are right here. They kind of die in this one. And it comes up and around and then,
And that would be in the commuter.
yeah, new commuter rail. Because right now, there is no rail system attached to the right-of-way, but they still own it, so there's no use on it.
And that would connect to the existing.
They would connect to the existing MARC that runs from Washington to Martinsburg. And so then I got back to my places diagram. And so the idea is to create the MARC train on one side of Hagerstown that creates tension between what I'm calling Hager Park on the east side of Hagerstown. So that people that come in on the train have to walk through downtown, experience all the little shops, and then come to a baseball game.
Or some other event.
Or some other event. Could be a concert, movie, So the idea is I created a series of parks. So of course the MARC train, and then all the little museums in City Park, and then parks that extend over, creating skate parks, a little skate park, some playing fields, growing gardens, and then extending this axis up the original B&O railroad line. But also, it sits in between the two ridges that you've seen earlier, so it's where all the water is collecting. So it creates sort of a retention area for all that water to clean it. And then it forms at the end one axis with the courthouse that sits behind the town square. So it gives a face in the park from the courthouse. And then as you go over, it connects all the other little parks and then creates another greenway that creates a buffer around a existing canal that has been channeled. And then pushes up into what is the stadium site plan, which is what I'm calling Waller Park. And right now it's a stadium attached to a movie theater with commercial properties on the ground floor, residential properties above, and then parking on the bottom two levels.
And that canal is part of a historic transportation canal?
It was part of a historical mill that sits right here. So they channelized it far out here, but it used to run into the mill that sits here.
Is it a running course at all?
Yeah. So yes, it doesn't move very fast, but it still has running water in it. And so the idea is how do different people get here? So if you're coming from the green space, you're going down this park, and then you're entering the baseball stadium, and you can see the canal. And I thought a more sustainable way is to vegetate the canal, which is something that I have learned over time, and that would help with all to collect all the pollutants from pavement. And so if you're coming from the downtown, you would enter through the main entrance, which is on axis with the main street, and you would enter this plaza area, which I feel could be used for anything. They could hold parties out there if they really wanted to. They could project a movie on the screen that sets on the entrance, or on top of the entrance. And so the idea is that there's a restaurant that looks onto this plaza, and then the entrance into what is the Sun Stadium and the movie theater, with the apartments rising above it.
Did you design that, Tim, or that exists?
I designed that, yeah.
Tim, this is sized for Class A baseball team?
Yes.
Which is what Hagerstown has now, or
Yes.
had historically?
It's what Hagerstown has now, and
Right.
has historically.
And they are thinking about building a new stadium.
Yes. So
Is there any parking issues, existing parking, that is useful to you?
There is an existing parking garage that I'm going to use that has over 432 spaces or 232 spaces in it. And then I'm creating a lot of parking along the green space to help with that. And then the idea of maybe this shopping center giving away some parking spots for events, maybe help with their commercial activity. Maybe those people will buy something from them, go to the ballpark. And then
You might want to walk people through how the stadium complex works.
And as you do that, would you just clarify what existing was proposed?
all of it is proposed,
So the
Including the
stadium,
stadium.
including the stadium.
so why baseball?
Why baseball? Because it's one of the historical things about Hagerstown. They've had a baseball team for a really long time.
Just for next.
And so now it's threatening to be taken away.
Where's the current baseball field?
The current baseball field is right here, so you wouldn't see it on this, but the idea is to pull it from here into the downtown so it better connects with the downtown.
So is part of the reason that they want to leave is because they want a new baseball field?
It's in a location that it floods, and then they also want a new baseball field. So the field's over 7 years old, so they're
Right now, that's abandoned industrial land.
this.
The new side.
Oh yes, There's a medical facility that's not used very much anymore because the hospital that used to sit on the hill right here has been moved to the outside of town. So a lot of those properties don't get that much business anymore.
Before you proceed, in this map, could you clarify all what you're designing in buildings or whatever?
All right. So I'm designing all of this area.
Okay. Those are all new.
Yes.
Well, there's a couple of existing buildings.
Well, this hotel is existing, and this building is a service for the hotel.
And the shopping centers.
And the shopping center is existing. So I'm designing all these buildings that you see surrounded by green. So this is a recreation center. And then this would be a civic building of some sort. Maybe their new town hall would go out there. And then I'm designing everything you see with shadows.
in front of that hall.
What? A monument to the history of Hubbardston.
Which you're designing or is it there?
Oh, which I'm designing.
Place.
Yeah. And then blocks that are created. So this block out to here, down. This is an existing park.
Okay.
And then this is all new park. So that's all design. This is all new.
Not the residential, just the park.
Well, some of the residential around the park is new.
The shadow.
Yeah,
The
the
shadow
buildings with
ones.
shadows around the park are not used very good. Yeah.
And you designed the one, the station.
Yes.
Thank you.
And the green space or something, or those are existing?
So this is new to here, which is where the school used to be. So they just moved it over. So this is an existing green space. And then over to here, and then I start designing again over here.
So you're connecting these existing?
Yes, so I'm stitching the existing parts together.
Do you have that on your, can you put that up?
Yeah, it's his diagram right there.
Where?
Oh, yeah, it's this diagram. So the dark, this isn't mine, but the darker areas, a lot of the diagrams.
This is those lower two
Yeah.
diagrams are
Yeah,
existing.
so this is existing, this is what I was doing.
And is this a one-way coupling? These two streets?
Yes, they're one way. And that's the stairs, yes.
And that's the principal entry into Hagerstown from the east, as far as I know. Right.
You come into Hagerstown,
Yeah, you do
you go
that.
down this street,
That's
so you don't actually,
Those are one-way couplings.
yes.
Could you locate I-70 for me and also tell me, or Casino now?
You want me to bring it up?
No, yeah, where is it in relation?
So it's off to, Casino Downs to the south, and Interstate 7 is to the south.
You had it there.
Think right there. CNO,
Yes, so Casino now runs here. That's where the March train is. The I-70 is this, comes right here, and then 81 goes right there.
now explain that. Now that is all clear.
All right, so when you're coming up this park system, you enter in from the ground level. You either go up to the second level and buy your ticket, the mezzanine level, or you can go into the little shop or Hall of Fame that they have. There's a lot of these little baseball stadiums that have a little Hall of Fame. And then the mezzanine floor has bathrooms in which they can access from the mezzanine floor. But then if you're coming from Main Street, you're coming onto this axis, which is the creation of that plaza. And so the idea was to create some kind of like decking element so that you felt like you were in this like a hip spot of the baseball field. And then the idea is you use the main concourse, which has the concession stands that supply both the movie theater and the baseball stadium. And then, yeah, you move along the concourse, or you go into the movie theaters from this level. And then from above that, you have the projection rooms and the apartments, which on the apartments, you either enter from here, this is an entrance to the apartment, or you enter from here, or you enter from the parking garage and go up.
So let me ask you, baseball is a private venture, investment. What do you envision as all these parks? Is it going to be a public-private investment, or it's all public? It's all going to go, who's going to maintain these parks?
I would
How do you,
venture to say they're all public parks.
okay, so if they're public parks, then are you going to propose bicycle paths and other?
Yes.
So are they all going to be completely connected?
Yes.
What would you say your main selling point is to, say, the city, right, or to the people you imagine to invest in, to say why this is the strategy to bring Hagerstown back to life?
I would say it's the idea of creating that actual relationship between the mark and the baseball stadium. So the idea of creating that movement of people across both the historical downtown into the baseball stadium, back and forth between the mark, creating.
Doing more than that, you've knocked out a lot of buildings,
Yes.
you created this whole green, and so how do you make the argument for that? Because that's the way to get people moving into Hagerstown.
Well, also, Tim, did you have a criteria for which buildings you took out?
My criteria was that I looked at the buildings that were industrial, that were falling down or dilapidated, which I walked across the site multiple times, seeing that either they weren't taking care of the buildings, or there was never anyone there.
So maybe I can ask the question in a different way, because I think it would help us frame the conversation. So you showed the example of, say, Frederick, right, which
Yeah.
added the canals,
Yeah.
that was their strategy, or the town that had Crayola, right? So it seems to me perhaps this is analogous to Frederick. Like, you have a big idea here, right? And how do you sell that idea to say, this is what, we knew Hagerstown, right? This is a big, we've got views, right? So what is it analogous to, the different kinds of city approaches that you saw in terms of rejuvenating?
So the idea was to create connections among their amenities, so that's what that green space starts to do. It starts to connect all of these amenities together, so that a person could get on a bike, let's say, go from the baseball stadium to the museum without ever, while being in a natural environment. So it's kind of this idea of creating a series of connections along a green space.
Well, isn't it really though the park and the ballpark? Isn't that really the answer to the question? It's the creation of the park,
Yeah.
which adds value, and the linking of the park and the stadium
Yes.
as a way to revitalize the downtown.
I'm walking from the station here to the baseball.
Yeah.
If I walk, how long? Or if I-
It's about half a mile
Half a mile.
from the MARC train to the stadium.
So, but under that, I just want to ask you, because you said this has a lot of character.
Yes.
So would it be greatest appreciated by walking, biking, or by car ride? So then the question comes, is that cars are still allowed there? So I'm wondering, how will you manage when you have such a, you put a station there and you're going to have, like say, in a game day, 50,000 people. Let's say they all decide to walk. Are we going to stop traffic so that they can increase this walking from there?
No, it's, what do you call it, Class A baseball?
Yeah,
Like
so-
5,000.
Only
Yeah, it's only
5,000.
5,000.
Okay, it's only 5,000.
It's not, yeah. It's not
Okay, so 5,000 people.
It's not London.
So right now, most of this street is still historical, so it's still made to be walkable. Yeah. So it's not like adding this influx of people is going to
Okay.
affect it.
But I'm just saying that to encourage more people to walk rather than ride, maybe we can do something.
I would have thought the distinguishing characteristic of this, I mean, it's a standard idea, kind of green belt and lots of historic models, Hartford, Hartford, big way into the early part of the 1900s. But it is the walkability, the fact that from the center, 10 minutes, you can get to that ring, that the whole theme of this ought to be embracing the idea of a walkable city. And that would be what would distinguish Hagerstown and what would validate, I would think, one of the principles of what you're trying to do. I mean, I think it's an awfully good question, you know, where does the money come from to construct it? Who maintains it? Because Hartford's a good example. Got some extraordinary money in that ring of parks that circles the city. And now they struggle, you know, not just to have them deteriorating every year. But I thought it was good, logical, and no small effort. I mean, I can't believe you look at everyone who's the building and decided. I'm thinking you just said industrial. You identified the few that were thriving, but took out most of them otherwise. It's a huge effort, I think. But certainly, and I see a lot of logic to it, and most of all, this idea of a very compact scale is what I think is the most important piece of it, walkable.
One drawing I wish you really had was a drawing along Main Street, right? That
Yeah.
shows us what that experience is, and I have maybe created, it's more like a boulevard, you added trees, and so it's an urban kind of space, but there's the linking. So we get that, because that's an important idea, so we get also a sense of what that character
Yeah.
of that walk would be in day or at night. So I think that's the drawing you need to do, right?
And I mean, that helps a lot. Your landscape plan, I think it misses it desperately, not having any indication of that town square. That seems like that is the centerpiece of the place and a very important part of this as a plan and diagram. And you really have to look for it here. That's the kind of...
And with digital things being where they are, it's an easy thing to fix.
Would you say, Matt?
I said on real game days, maybe it becomes pedestrian, that street.
Yeah.
And then we divert the traffic, you know, around, which will really highlight their access. And then no questions will be asked that Hagerstown has to be up.
But does that stadium sit on the water course?
Well, I'm thinking the canal, yeah, right here.
Yeah.
So what I thought was if I could build retention areas around the outside of the town, or outside of the baseball stadium, it would help to catch the water around the stadium. So the idea is going park is going sort of this way, but to build retention areas around to capture.
That's good. I wish you had shown that as part of the basic idea that is managing this water and dealing with it. I also don't really see it in your, you talk about adding plants there, but that's a little timid. You know, I would have thought you would really celebrate that.
Yeah, so a lot of this would be retention areas.
Don't see it in the plan. What it appears is though you put the field right over the water. That seems like
I like the idea of behind a lot of what you're proposing. I think there's a move to say, okay, we can extend this. We can extend this passenger rail to kind of anchor one side of Main Street is a strong one. And then the idea is to say, okay, what if the baseball becomes a new kind of celebratory anchor on the other side, and what happens in between? That seems to be the clearest portion of the proposal. And to me, the other park space, while it's interesting, it might be a phase 2. Like I think it's hard to see it on equal plane because it's so much investment at once that I think you need to prioritize. And I think that it would be interesting to think about what would a baseball stadium that could be uniquely Hagerstown, what would that be? Like, what is it about, you know, so when you think about the different baseball parks and how some of them become really a kind of emblem of the city because of their particular, the way that they're integrated into the neighborhood, for example, and the strange things about the field that creates. I think that you could do, rather than saying, okay, I'm just going to wipe out these industrial buildings, could you very carefully position this and say, you know, what does it mean to put it on top of a canal? And that would be actually a kind of new experience of attending a baseball baseball game? Or what if you were sitting in the old industrial buildings, using that as leisure and party space? But, you know, like, I think you could invent a little bit more based on the conditions and situate it according to those opportunities.
Okay.
Can you talk a little bit about the watershed?
So the watershed, as I said, was there's bridges that run along. So the idea is the water collects into this central space and into this central space. And then
So those are natural valley lines.
Yes. And then it runs down here to what disappeared from the drawing, Antune Creek, which then flows out to the Potomac River.
Okay, so none of this, so this is all surface water, or is it,
Well,
is it combined sewer? Is it,
I'm not really sure about that.
you combine sanitary with stormwater?
I didn't look into that one.
Okay, because a lot of cities, the older cities, have combined sewer systems that are under EPA consent to separate the water quality, particularly draining into homes with contaminated water is a problem. Because I'm trying to think about the reason for the big investment, which this is a big investment. And you talked about flooding at one point, and pointed to the area down here.
But where the baseball stadium is,
Yeah.
because of that canal being.
Yeah, but see, those are opportunities to begin to think about where you actually start with creating your wetlands park and your whole series of retention and cleansing ponds and the whole cities. You probably solve a lot of the problem by disengaging stormwater from sanitary and pick up all the street water and so on. It's, I think, your idea about 40 acres of new park and 520 new trees and so on is a compelling story if there's a reason for doing it in that sense. I think what has, for me, has been the tension between the ring of parks and the skewer through the middle as to what dominates the idea. And what dominates in the drawings is the ring of parks. But you talk about this being a destination city, an attraction city. The baseball stadium is obviously an anchor point. The Marks Station is another anchor point, which is not celebrated the same as the baseball stadium. And so a lot of these cities which have these coupled main streets are real problems because they can't support retail of those streets. And so how do you solve that problem of entry with the dual street system in the town that doesn't have a large population is a big urban issue for this size of the town. I think your idea of investing in attractions make it more of a regional destination than a local destination in that sense. So, and maybe this train is one that connects down into Washington, D.C. and so on. Maybe I misunderstood.
Yeah, that's the MARC train would get.
It does. Okay, so in that sense, you could have events that take place in Hagerstown as a day trip to Hagerstown, for example, from Washington and so on, and just make it into a really big event. And so therefore create a draw. And the park system is a plus that goes along with that. But to me, it's the experiencing this historic city. And the ability to get to Antietam and the other places from this drop-off point is to really make this economically very viable.
What is the follow-on?
That's very much the point. I mean, a minute ago, Renee asked the question about what the sort of main driver aspects of this thing. And Tim went through the industrial history of this place so quickly. They didn't mention all of the amazing kind of industrial things that happened here. The Oregon Company, there were several airplane companies, including Fairchild, that was located here, that was eventually bought by Martin. I don't know, it's in your document, Tim. I mean, and the awareness on his part that there's already a huge tourist industry immediately in the region waiting to be capitalized upon by simply making that group of people aware that there are all these other interesting things here that are celebrated in existing museums, but the museums are located in various spots, they're kind of spread out. And what the park system does is to pull all that stuff together, as an asset. And then the other recognition on his part was the expanding population in this region and the interest, actually, the sort of emerging interest in sort of small town life, but good small town life, and then being able to connect that with the commuter rail system that has to do with a larger community, being the sort of economic engine for, what pays.
Well, in actual fact, what we're seeing is we're seeing people moving to places like Hagerstown because they can't afford to live in Washington. And they're driving down 270 and spending tremendous long hours on commutes because of the cost of housing.
They're actually proposing to expand 70 and 270 to fit all people that are traveling.
I mean, talk about a crazy way to do things,
They'd rather invest in interstates than commuter rails.
But I think there are also people that are choosing to live in places like this because they'd rather live in a small town.
Yes, no question. And Hagerstown is very quickly growing into the Washington, Baltimore suburban region because of it.
You didn't talk much about the I think good planning basis. I have a harder time feeling warm about the building, though. You want to talk about that?
In terms of
What's the architectural intent?
the architectural intent was to.
Or maybe I should say, did you really design that, or?
So this was I designed the bigger thing for most of, and then I tried to get down to the scale of the building. So the building isn't as figured out as the rest of it, but I did try to design the building. And the material-wise, I looked mainly because brick is a huge company in Hagerstown. So the idea of, of keeping the majority of the facade brick. And then other than that,
I think there's also, wasn't Tim, there also an idea that the industrial area could be the inspiration for some of the language
Yes.
of the stadium
yes,
as well?
yes.
Yeah, I think this is almost so comprehensive that it almost becomes too evil. You need to pull out strong things and the ideas and they just really pop out. I mean, that one diagram of the ring, to me, is the most important diagram here. The second one is the one in downtown, which shows the Main Street idea, but we've shown it as a single street. But you told me it's a one-way, and so you've got a double street. But that idea and the whole entry into downtown becomes important. So how you enter from 81, how you enter from 70, all become important in this sort of regionalism notion of how you make this a destination. But I think having gone through Hagerstown to get to Antietam, there's a beautiful drive through that area, which most people don't know about unless you're going specifically to the battlefield. And Hagerstown is almost kind of it's a leftover. You want to get past it to get to the destination. But if you could set this up so that you have festivals and other things happening here, but you come to Hagerstown to stay and you connected Hagerstown to Antietam and then back, then it becomes a weekend destination and begins to build the market.
What is the foul line?
So I stopped putting dots up here because it started covering the whole building, the stadium building. So the idea was creating a series of decks, like this being like one of those decks they have at baseball stadiums, the unique ones where you can sit out there and you can watch from tower. And then the other one being the sun deck, because of the Hagerstown Suns, they have to have a deck at least named after them. creating another one over here where you could set on there and look down into the baseball stadium. So yeah, I just didn't want to keep putting red dots on top of the building.
Oh,
You know what I think might have made this whole thing better is if you did a little bit less. I think it's actually true architecture. It's also true, and the comment was made in terms of really the design of these parks. It feels like a design, but it doesn't feel like a fully fleshed out or thought through. I wonder if all of this would have been better if it had been a little more diagrammatic, a little less illustrative, a little less explicit, and a little more about principles, and that could have applied both to landscape and buildings, talking more about intention and principles than suggesting somehow that they were designs. Might have all worked.
More like this drawing.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a terrific drawing, but I think there are things in between that and this that could have been more successful than actually getting down and delineating pathways with that level of precision or individual trees with that specific.
Well, considering, Michael, he refused to really draw trees for a long time, this was a big improvement. He suffered from a lot of architecture students do, which is all trees are the same, and therefore, we don't need to draw them.
Yeah. So, it's good you tried. Yeah, I don't want to say that, but I have a feeling it would have been a better planning study had you not actually tried to dig quite so deep so fast and dealt more with principles or big ideas, illustrated and more diagrammatic. Still, they can be a little bit illustrative, but not quite as precise as the feeling of that, which feels like a final design.
I'd rather you object to the specific quality of the position. Because at one level, you only deal with principles and generalities. You never get down through it, and you never learn to do all that. Stuff where you get down to it, even if it's not.
I suspect, Michael, that would be easier for him to do now that he's done this once.
Excuse me?
It'll be easier for him to do what you're suggesting now that he's made an illustrative plan and can go back and make the generalizations, which is a new experience.
Great learning experience. So, yeah, my point would be, might have been a better package if it was like that. But no, I think you want to push yourself into these things.
Maybe another, I was thinking, maybe along a similar line, that there's so much on the page, but actually, or the presentation, but actually that there are a couple of really key moments that communicate the intention a lot. And I think if you had worked harder to explore that intention, it would affect sort of the clarity of what's really important to you. I think it's hard in this to identify what's the sort of critical catalyst, or what's informing the character of the architecture. It's a kind of broad brush, but I think that like as I mentioned, that diagram kind of hits the nail on the head. And I think that rendering is getting there too, in terms of communicating a character about reuse of industrial space and public space, and it has a bit more of a kind of ephemeral quality than some of the others. And if you could maybe start working that, and maybe working with physical models in a way that says, like, how's the space going to feel? I think it would maybe illustrate more than some of these things that appear quite detailed, but yet are hard to dive into them.
And had you done what I said, I probably would have said, I wish you had gone into
did you?
On that note, so, Tim, two critical takeaways here, I think. One, the value of the more abstract stuff. I was thinking about what you said in terms of actually, I've been encouraging you to take this stuff back to Hagerstown and sell it to the town fathers and mothers, because you can imagine they could actually get quite on board with this idea. And that those kinds of drawings that we're talking about would help to communicate that, very, very clearly to them. We're thinking about how you talk to clients, right?
And I think the point about incorporating stormwater management into it could give it the teeth.
And the second thing, you would convince all these people to go with you to help you. Matt Bell was the chair of this committee. Lily Van couldn't be with us today.
So, okay, Tim. Terrific job, really. I think these comments are really speaking to the sort of scale and depth at one level of what you've attempted here. And he's right, you ought to package this, bring it up there, and make them watch your presentation about it, largely because I think, you know, the business of you identifying both models that the city could emulate, like Easton or other places, and also some of the physical challenges that the city has is a very sophisticated, two-handed way to deal with this, and I think that it's extraordinary. The problem is, with places like Hagerstown, it's a little bit like, you know, somebody who used to weigh 200 pounds and then they lost a lot of weight and their clothes don't fit anymore. You have all this infrastructure and museums and things, and this, you know, you need something to try and tie it together. It's interesting people talked about the scale of the park system because if you look at this, really, I think there's just a couple of moves. That and that and that. Really, the big parks are already there. So the idea of kind of introducing them to sort of link them, I think is actually more modest than it seems. And one of the reasons why I think that's key is because I think what you would probably end up doing is having a real estate developer partner with you, because adding a park and then developing houses that look onto a park is a surefire way to add value in the city. It's a lot different adding a house here than it is adding a house here. The value proposition by adding green space is significant. And in a place like Hagerstown, you would probably really very much need to do that. Tim's research into Hagerstown and the problem of Hagerstown, which I think he went through a little bit too quickly, was quite extraordinary. And really, the discussion we had in the committee about, you know, Antietam and how far these things are away and how close, the railroad infrastructure, and all the museums, and how to memorialize all these things that Hagerstown has been about historically versus what it's about today. Tim moderated those discussions and brought that information to us in a very sophisticated but in a very simple way, and I think I certainly appreciated that. You know, and Tim's he's almost been apologetic about doing a project in Hagerstown. It's like, well, I'm going to do Hagerstown, and then as he dug into it, he found out there's actually quite a bit more there than even he thought, and he knew quite a bit more about it than Steve or me or Lily Van. And so the whole research aspect and the whole idea of trying to figure out how this place works into this larger regional picture and the problem of the small town, I think is really what this is about. The business of figuring out the topography and the Main Street, the train station, ballpark, I think you guys are right. I mean, I think that's really one of the really critical ideas about this is you can put that in the depression, get it closer to downtown, use the parking resources. It may never activate all of Main Street, but it will certainly help. And one of the other reasons it will help is because minor league ballparks, 70 nights a year, right? Maybe you might have 10 or 20 other, you know, motocross events or, you know, old rock star reunion tours and things like that at the stadium, but they're not that many things. So by adding the movie theater and by adding the residential there, you start to program this into something that gets a little bit more nexus of activity. And I think also, Tim went a little bit quickly, but these plans, even though they're pretty schematic, they've worked out very nicely in terms of just making sure that there's a believability factor to how the thing works, and that the shared use of the concessions with the movies and the residential is all something that I think Tim patiently worked through and made into something which is quite believable, but also adds to the simple program of the ballpark, which I think is really something quite noteworthy. Tim, it's been a real pleasure to be part of this thesis. I learned things about Hagerstown I never thought I would learn, and I appreciate your dogged determinism to make sure that the rest of us understood those things as well. Terrific job.